Hey there everybody and welcome back. For those of you that are looking to learn how to build your own mobile or web apps completely free without needing to know how to code and you want to learn to do it on a simple drag and drop style interface, stay tuned. I'm covering the basics in today's video. So before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content. Alright, so jumping straight in, the first question I usually get is how or why is it free? So I'm going to cover that. Then I will give a quick overview of some resources, and you're going to want to stick around through the tutorial itself because at the end of the video, I'm going to provide a really big bonus. So let's jump straight in. First up, how is it free and why? So if you go to blog.appgyver.com, you'll see the URL here. You can scroll through and read more in your own time if you're interested, but basically there used to be a $10 million revenue limit. Basically, if you were at or below that limit, if I'm not mistaken, then you could have a free version of the community edition. However, right now, you'll see that you can use the community edition without any kind of revenue generation limits, and there are no free features that are being hidden behind paid plans currently. So that's really all that there is to that. So you can read more about this if you're interested. But basically, to get started, you can go to appgyver.com. So this is what appgyver.com looks like. And when you click to learn more about the free to use no code application community edition, you can read more here and sign up right here. Now that I've covered that, once you sign up, you'll have the option to basically get dropped into a dashboard, and you can just click add app, and it will take you to another screen we'll cover shortly. Now, one thing to note, I do have quite a few different app templates as well as video tutorials over at codelessfix.com. Now, what we're going to do is we have our dashboard opened. So I'm going to show you exactly how to walk through or get started with AppGyver. And I want to go ahead and let you know it can be as simple or complex as you need it to be. So AppGyver at the time of filming this video is free for the community edition. The only things you have to pay for are going to be to upload your app to the various app stores. Doesn't matter what platform you use, you're going to have to pay that fee. Additionally, you'll have to pay for database storage if you use an app that needs a database. However, a lot of databases have a free tier, like Firebase, for example. But we're not going to be covering that in today's video. I will provide resources on that later, so you're going to want to stay tuned because I'm covering some different bonuses at the end of the video. So jumping straight in, when you've logged in and accessed your actual homepage, you'll notice ours is completely blank. I've deleted everything, so to get started, you'll see up at the top left, we have the AppGyver logo. This doesn't actually do anything. And then we have our app name here. So let's just say we wanted to rename it to New One. So we now have our new application. That's the name there. So first up, we'll go kind of top left and work our way across. So you'll see we have our page selector here. So when we select this, we have the option to view our current pages. Global canvas is there by default for all apps. And then you'll see here we have our home page. So we can click here to publish it in the marketplace or remove it from the app. Or we can click here to add a new page. So we'll just call this new page. When we do this, we'll get a page with some sample content. So what we can do is we can click save, and it will require you the majority of the time to save before leaving a newly created page. But what we could do is now we can try to delete this page, and you'll see we're back to our home page. Once we save, we can now click the home page again, and we get these little updates up here. So that's the home page selector. The UI canvas is this canvas right here. You can change based on what you need. For example, if you wanted to look at an iPad screen, or if you wanted to look at an iPhone XS, you can kind of just scroll through and figure out what you're interested in viewing based on the actual potential size of that canvas, so to speak. So what we can do is we can just stick with some kind of a default, and then you can choose your zoom level as well. Now, looking at the top of the screen, up first we have our launch menu. So when we select this, we have quite a bit of content. So first up is the app view portal. When you select this, you'll be provided a page with all of the different apps in your account, and you simply select the app to view it in what is close to real time. So, for example, this should look familiar because this is the home page that we were just on. So to show an example of the close to real time updates, what we could do is let's drag a button over here, and we'll save the app and quickly switch over here, and now we have our button. Now, you'll notice this URL is not a custom URL, and I'll provide resources on how to update that for whatever website you want. So we have covered the preview portal. Now there is a mobile preview app you can download and click here to reveal your QR code so that you can actually connect and do this view in the mobile app. And then I'll cover how to upload to different app stores, or at least the basics, at the end of the video. So we've covered everything in preview. Now we'll look at build services. So when you select here, you'll be taken to a page like this. The documentation section is pretty helpful. You can view documentation on different features. And what we're going to do is a very high level overview because, again, I will have different resources at the end of the video. So you'll see we have the ability to build for iOS, Android, and a web app. Now, these are going to provide you with the source code, but my understanding is it's compiled source code. So it's not going to be very easy for you to take those files and do whatever you want with them. But the good news is, unlike some other platforms, this setup is going to enable you to have the code. They aren't really like holding it and forcing you to pay anything, which is nice. So you'll be able to configure your apps here. So looking at a web app as examples, you have different image assets and permissions. Similar to the Android app, you have your key store options, your bundle settings, image assets, and permissions, just like the configure option for iOS. So that's everything in the build tab. And that's really everything in distribute. Now we're going to cover themes really quickly. So this is something that I'm not very good at because I don't really have that eye for detail and aesthetics. I'm really just okay with a plain black and white canvas. But you can view the different themes and options as you're going through here. For example, you can see all of these different options and edit them to your liking as you see fit. Now, if you want to learn more about those themes, you can double click on your components, which I can go over in other videos if you're interested. But for the most part, you can find out, okay, right here we have our text, for example. And some components will allow you to do a double click where you can edit settings and style. Although those tend to be the components that have a little bit more of a complexity to them. For example, this image list, when you double click it, you have all of these options here. But things like text, they don't have the multiple options. So you would go to your layout and edit those over here in layout and style. For example, if you click edit, you'll see all of these different options that should look a little bit similar, like font, for example, and font size. All of these are going to have different options that could relate to the theme menu. So you can check out other videos I have and other videos other people post on YouTube to learn more about that. But that's the theme overview, really just quickly. Now we're going to look at navigation. So the custom navigation is something I haven't worked with much, but you can read AppGyver documentation on this. Most people opt for the navigation menu here. So first up is the navigation header bar. You'll see that shows homepage right here. If you don't want it, you can just click no and click save, and now it's gone. Then we have our navigation menu. If it's enabled, you'll see it over here. Same thing, you can disable it here. As you add pages, you can add them here. For example, if I add these, you'll see we now have these menu options, and you can customize those by selecting them, naming them, and choosing what page in the app they refer to, as well as choosing the icon. So that's the navigation section. Now let's go to data. Now we're not going to cover much here because it can be kind of complex, but there is a Firebase connector, and you do have the ability when you choose this to enter in all of these different configurations for setting up a user sign-in page. So by opening every single one of these, all of these options can be grabbed from Firebase using a free account. Your web app ID, project ID. Again, I'll have additional video tutorials on how to do this at the end of the video. But general idea is if you want to connect to Firebase, this has a built-in option for you. And then there is the option to use other options here, like REST API direct integration, where you type in your own URL and you can configure it here. We have our auth page, which is authentication. You can choose third-party or Google Firebase. And the idea here is when you configure this or enable it, you will then get a Google Firebase or third-party login page. So the idea is when we go here, now you'll see we have Firebase authentication and a pre-built login page, which has its own functionality built in. You'll then configure that using the Firebase connector and work through the settings there. And then lastly, you have a help section. You can look and read more here. Now, that covers the top menus, which are just the high-level basics. You have your history and exit/save options, which are relatively straightforward. You can either look over history or exit the application or save it. Now, going over these menus, we have our main section on the left with all of our components, our main UI here, and then our what I'll call additional UI settings here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with this left menu. So starting off with the core components. These are pretty straightforward. Basically, what you see is what you get. So, for example, an icon, you drag it over, it's an icon. Now, unfortunately, at the time of filming this video, AppGyver does not have a way to drag items wherever you want on the screen. So I'll walk over how to move them in a moment, but you can arrange them in a different order easily. Just drag and drop. Same thing with really every other component over here. They're relatively straightforward, just like having these forms and other options. Now, you may try to interact with these when you're using the builder and it will not work, but you can interact with them once you're in this page over here. Now, one thing to note is if you're using authentication, then you may need to remove it if you want to actually use your app here. And you can see things like drop down, you can see what the button looks like, the label, etc. So that covers the basics of the actual components themselves. And there is a section primitives here with more, but you may be wondering, okay, what if I want more? Well, they do have a marketplace, and if I'm not mistaken, all of this is free. I've never seen one that actually has a cost. So you have a marketplace for components, and then you also have a marketplace for flow functions, which we'll cover shortly, for data, and then your updates will appear here. To install something, like let's just say we want to install this basic list, we can click install, and then you'll see we're moved over to this install page, and you can read more about what is or what are all of these different options, but you'll see we have this basic list here, and we can drop it in, and there we go. So that's the basics of the actual components, and it may not look like a ton, but once you learn how to customize them, you can actually make some really creative stuff. Now, basics here, these are your different views. So for example, if you want to view this as if you were viewing from Galaxy Tab 10, you can do that. And then you have your zoom as well. Now, moving to this middle screen, this one's straightforward. This is just your UI or user interface. This is where you'll be able to drag and drop, manipulate, and see at a high level what your application is going to look like. Now, when you select an item, that changes what appears in this menu over here. So the top half of this menu is the settings for the different components you're working with. The bottom half is your tree. So everything that's in the UI is in a less visually appealing section over here for a reason. The idea is, as you can tell, we only see these 4 components here, but over here we have a more high-level overview of what we're looking at. So if you wanted to move this up here, you can do it by using the tree. Additionally, you can click here to edit these components, which would be the equivalent of just clicking here. So the idea is if we click on this, you'll see in this case, we get a more complex menu, which is the equivalent of a double click. But if we click here, we don't actually have the option to edit it. So it only shows up on the more complex components that have different parts. Now, when we select a component, like the button, you'll see that the properties change based on the component we have. So you have your label, which if we put hey, changes this right here. Disabled, if we were to set it to true, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't do anything, and now it has a lighter color. And we have a repeat with, which I have other videos that cover that in more detail. Visible, which is pretty straightforward. The component name, which is the name here, and then the component ID, and then the ability to remove or show in Marketplace. The reason you may want to show in Marketplace is so you can learn more about a component, if there's any specific notes on how to use it or anything like that. Now, we do also have a style section. You'll see we have a couple of styles here, but you can click here and edit a style to change different options, which are related to the theme menu we were looking at previously in some cases. So an example is we have a bunch of different colors here. We can add a new palette and decide we want this green color. We can name it and click Save, and now we have that green color for the button. You can edit your padding and adjust just like you see here, different options for padding. And then you have effects, border, as you can see, quite a few different UI related options. And then lastly, we have our layout. And you can choose different things like fit your content, grow to full width, again, more UI related options. And the tree we just covered. The last major thing about the AppGyver interface is going to be this section right here, which is the logic. And the main thing is it's really easy to get started and say, okay, I'm going to have this really, really cool app. So if I were to clear out some of this stuff, and let's just say we wanted to make something that most people think of, like maybe like a social media app, which I do have a YouTube series on. Well, let's say, okay, most social media apps, you'd have a login page. If we already added that, we're going to need a button to upload something, and then we're probably going to need some text. And you get this added, and then you wonder, okay, how do we make the button do something? And that is where the logic comes in. When you select a component, you go down here, and you'll see that you have these different menus. So core is just like the core up here. It's the flow functions, which we mentioned earlier, which are just here by default. You have the by me options, and then the installed. The installed, just like installed up here, are the ones you install from the marketplace. The marketplace here should be the same as what we looked at earlier, but it just takes you to the flow functions section. So you can open something like pick from library. And when you install it, as you're scrolling through, you'll see you now have it right here. Now, this is where things can get kind of complex. So we'll start over on the core section, and we may just leave it at the core section. If we want this component to do something by default, we have to tell it what to do. So when we click the component, we click to add logic, and then this is the first thing that happens. It's the component tap. So we can choose over here what we want to happen when this is selected. So let's set something up for ourselves to use. You'll see we have homepage and Firebase authentication. Let's add a new page, and we'll just call it 2, and we'll click Save. So now when we go to our home page, we want this button to take us to page 2. So we click, or we have component tap here, and we drag over our option. So it's almost an exact mirror of this right here. You drag your component into the interface, you drag your flow function into this area here. The only other thing you have to do is connect the two, and that's all there is to it. When you click Save, it won't look like anything happened, but now when we click the button, we're at page 2. Now, you can make this much more complex, so you can change adding in data variables. For example, if you wanted to upload a file, you can set an app variable to say, okay, here's where the file is, here's what it's called. You have options for alerts. So maybe you want a confirmation menu. So we can make this app a little bit more complex now. So we will connect this to the confirmation dialog. And when we click yes, we want it to open the page. Now you may wonder, how do we know it's yes? Well, when we click on outputs, you'll see that we have output at port 1 is confirmed, output at port 2 is error. So what we'll do is we'll click Save. And now when we click button, you'll see we have confirm, OK, or cancel. If I click cancel, nothing happens. But if I click OK, I'm now at page 2. You have the option to add in a bunch of other things, data variable or data records. So this data section allows you to create, send, update data. You have a QR scanner or QR code scanner, take photo option. I have a separate video, which I'll link in the description, which has the ability to take and upload pictures. Again, just tons of different options. One of my favorite is the if condition, although this can be very complex because basically you're saying if something happens, do something else. So the idea here, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can create your own formulas here to say, if this happens, do this, or whatever the case may be. So that's really everything in the AppGyver interface. So very simple app if you wanted to just kind of get started. We'll ignore the if condition, but I can cover what formulas are very, very quickly at a high level. So anytime you're looking at a component, such as this button, and you decide, okay, we want to choose the type of values or data that's here. We have the option for static text, data variables, formula, or component properties. The formula has tons of options. Right now, you'll see in double quotes, it just says button, So if we change this text to the letter A and click Save, now the letter A appears here. So you'll see formulas at the very basics can just be something simple like that. But it could be something else, like if we chose an app variable, which we don't have any yet, or if we wanted to choose a date. So for example, if we wanted to choose a math function, you could choose to have the button be the addition of this and this. Again, high-level overview, but you would have to probably change it to text. And again, I have more videos on how to use all of this because this gets very complex, but the general idea is you can add in some very complex things like pulling system data like the system browser type and stuff like that, although I'm not sure how accurate some of that may be. But that's the general overview. The only other thing to note is the app variables that we mentioned previously are in this variables slider. So you have the different types of variables here. App variables are available throughout your entire app. Page variables are limited to the specific page. Page parameters are passed between pages. And data variables are your data resource data. So for example, what you're sending or receiving. So if you wanted to add a data variable, it would be related to this data resource section here. When you create a resource and say, okay, here's my API URL or here's my API, then you have the ability to add data variables related to that resource. So that's all of the basics. Everything can get much more complex very quickly. For example, if you want to add an app variable, you'll notice when you select it that there are different variable types. So one thing I want to note is it's usually best to get started building something simple first. So you could always start off with something simple like maybe a journaling app. So we can do something very, very basic just to cover actually using this very quickly. So we can add a title page, and let's say this is my app. And then maybe we want this to be centered. So what we'll do is we'll click center here, and you may notice, oh, this doesn't actually do anything. There's a difference between the position and the layout. So the text align is what you're looking for. Now we have text here and a button here. So let's name this button Submit. And if you want, if it's confusing using a formula, you can just choose static text. Now, if we want to change this text when we enter text, we'll need an input field. So let's drag that over. This is where a user would enter text. And then we're going to assign that text to a variable. So we added this variable earlier, but I'll remove it so we can start from scratch. So we only really need a page variable. So we'll click Add Page Variable, and it's variable 1. We'll just call it stuff. And now when we click on this option here, you'll see that our home page, all of this stuff is because we're currently on our actual home page. So everything looks correct so far. Main focus is on updating this here. So now when we select it, you'll see it says enter text, and our value is going to be a data variable, page variable, stuff. So hopefully this is starting to make sense. The idea here is when we enter text, then this is automatically assigning whatever is value to the page variable. So the value is whatever's entered here, and it's going to be saved as stuff. And then you have the option to change this here, for example. So we could go to data variables, page variable, and make it stuff also. So let's see what that does. So now we're going to go here and we'll just start typing. And you'll notice as we type, the text appears up here because this is what the variable stuff is. And this is that variable basically being displayed in real time or close to it. Now you have the ability to change what the button does. Maybe the button, for example, is going to be a reset. So what we can do here is, let's say we want to do something like set page variable stuff, which is this variable right here. You just click page variable, stuff, save, and the assigned value, we can just make it a space. So now let's see what happens. And you notice the page will typically clear out when you've saved the app. So we'll type in some letters, we'll click the button, and now everything has disappeared, but you'll see there is a space there. So we've made something really, really simple. So you can make a static app. You now know how to navigate between pages, save some content to the app. Bearing in mind, this is not saving locally or to a database, but I will show videos on how to do that. Now, I know that this is a very high-level overview, and you may feel like this platform is either really complex or maybe it's kind of simple and you want to know more. So what I want to go ahead and walk you through, as I said earlier, is going to be some additional resources for you. So if you go over to codelessfix.com, you'll see there are some different options for app templates, and then you'll see I have codeless apps. So there are different options over here, but the main thing to note is the app templates are typically going to be things that you can import into AppGyver. Now, one thing on this is some of these do have a cost, so instead, if you're looking strictly for free stuff, there is a video tutorials section where I have AppGyver tutorials. Now, before I jump into this, I did want to make a very quick note that there are some free downloads available at codelessfix.com with some app templates that I have already built. And I also walk through how to import these into AppGyver yourself to use. But if you want to stick strictly to video tutorials, I want to cover this because if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that I've made all of these. I was going through a playlist pretty quickly, but these are all of the different tutorials. So the basics, I have a crash course, and then basics for things in AppGyver, simple things like duplicating apps, installing components and logic, which I covered earlier. But there's more complex stuff. The user interface, making different types of apps. There's tons of resources that are data related to the APIs and saving local data. What I think you're going to enjoy the most are the bottom few sections, making apps. I cover in detail making different types of apps in AppGyver, and at the end of any of these videos, that is where you go into publishing. So if you want to make any of these apps, which are simple one video applications, usually about 60 minutes or less, I'll walk through how to make tons of different types of apps like a portfolio app or a text converter, personal journal app, a ticketing app. There are tons of different options, but I also have series. So this is a playlist for all AppGyver tutorials. This is making a social app, which is an older video series. This is a newer one, creating a social or sharing app. And then this is a video making an app for my channel, which I actually got into Google Play and the Apple App Store. Now, down here is the most important one because the apps don't do anything if you don't put them anywhere. So publishing apps. I have everything from making a key store file to uploading to Google Play to building and hosting web apps. There's tons of different videos. These aren't really in any particular order, but I cover all of this because I get tons of questions from people where they're asking things that I've already covered how to do. So hopefully by scanning through this, it'll help you out with your AppGyver journey. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.